Chapter 8. Chapter 8. Joe meets Apollon. "Girls, where are you going?" asked Amy, coming into their room one Saturday afternoon and finding them getting ready to go out with an air of secrecy which excited her curiosity. "Never mind, little girls, shouldn't ask questions," returned Joe sharply. "Now, if there is anything mortifying to our feelings when we are young, is to be told that, and to be bidden to run away, dear, is still more trying to us." Amy bridled up at this insult and determined to find out the secret if she teased for an hour. Turning to Meg, who never refused to anything very long, she said coaxingly, "Do tell me. I should think you might let me go too, for Beth is fussing over her piano and I haven't got anything to do and I'm so lonely." "I can't, dear, because you aren't invited," began Meg. But Joe broke in impatiently. "Now, Meg, be quiet or you will spoil it all. You can't go, Amy, so don't be a baby and whine about it. You're going somewhere with Laurie, I know you are. You were whispering and laughing together on the sofa last night, and you stopped when I came in. Aren't you going with him?" "Yes, we are. Now do be still and stop bothering." Amy held her tongue, but used her eyes and saw Meg slip a fan into her pocket. "Now, I know, you're going to the hall to see the 7 castles," she cried, adding resolutely, "and I shall go, for Mother said I might see it, and I got my rag money, and it was meant not to tell me in time." "Just listen to me a minute and be a good child," said Meg soothingly. "Mother doesn't wish you to go this week because your eyes are not well enough to bear the light of this fairy piece. Next week you can go with Beth and Hannah and have a nice time." "I don't like that half as well as going with you and Laurie. Please let me. I've been sick with this cold so long and shut up. I'm dying for some fun. Do, Meg. I'll be ever so good," pleaded Amy, looking pathetic as she could. "Suppose we take her. I don't believe Mother would mind if we bundle her up well," began Meg. "If she goes, I shan't, and if I don't, Laurie won't like it, and it will be very rude after he invited only us to go and drag in Amy. I should think she'd hate to poke herself where she isn't wanted," said Joe crossly, for she disliked the trouble of overseeing a fidgety child when she wanted to enjoy herself. Her tone and manner angered Amy, who began to put her boots on, saying, in her most aggravating way, "I shall go. Meg says I may, and if I pay for myself, Laurie hasn't anything to do with it. You can't sit with us, for our seats are reserved, and you mustn't sit alone, so Laurie will give you his place, and that will spoil our pleasure, or he'll get another seat for you, and that isn't proper when you weren't asked. You shan't stir a step, so you may just stay where you are," scolded Joe, crosser than ever, having just pricked her finger on her in her hurry. Sitting on the floor with one boot on, Amy began to cry, and Meg to reason with her when Laurie called from below, and the 2 girls hurried down, leaving their sister wailing. For now and then she forgot her grown-up ways and acted like a spoilt child. Just as the party were setting out, Amy called over the banisters in a threatening tone, "You'll be sorry for this, Joe March. See if you ain't." "Fiddlesticks," returned Joe, slamming the door. They had a charming time, for the 7 castles of the Diamond Lake was as brilliant and wonderful as the heart could wish. But in spite of the comical red imps, the sparkling elves, and the gorgeous princes and princesses, Joe's pleasure had a drop of bitterness in it. The fairy queen's yellow curls reminded her of Amy, and between the acts she amused herself with wondering what her sister would do to make her sorry for it, and she and Amy had many lively skirmishes in the course of their lives. Both had quick tempers and were apt to be violent when fairly roused. Amy teased Joe, Joe irritated Amy, and the semi-conscious explosions occurred, of which both were much ashamed afterwards. Although the oldest, Joe had the least self-control and had a hard time trying to crush the fiery spirit which continually getting her into trouble. Her anger never lasted long, and having humbly confessed her fault, she sincerely repented and tried to do better. Her sisters used to say that they rather liked to get Joe into a fury because she was such an angel afterwards. Poor Joe tried desperately to be good, but her bosom enemy was always ready to flame up and defeat her, and it took years of patient effort to subdue it. When they got home, they found Amy reading in the parlour. She assumed an injured air as they came in, never lifting her eyes from her book or asked a single question. Perhaps curiosity might have conquered resentment if Beth had not been there to inquire and receive a glowing description of the play. On going up to put away her best hat, Joe first looked towards the bureau, for in their last quarrel, Amy had soothed her feelings by turning Joe's top drawer upside down on the floor. Everything was in its place, however, and after a hasty glance into her various closets, bags and boxes, Joe decided that Amy had forgiven and forgotten her wrongs. There Joe was mistaken, for the next day she made a discovery which produced a tempest. Meg, Beth and Amy were sitting together late in the afternoon when Joe burst into the room, looking excited and demanding breathlessly, "Has anyone taken my book?" Meg and Beth said no at once and looked surprised. Amy poked the fire and said nothing. Joe saw her colour rise and was down upon her in a minute. "Amy, you've got it!" "No, I haven't." "You know where it is then?" "No, I don't." "That's a fib," cried Joe, taking her by the shoulders and looking fierce enough to frighten a much braver child than Amy. "It isn't. I haven't got it. Don't you know where it is now? And I don't care. You know something about it, and you better tell at once, or I'll make you." And Joe gave her a slight shake. "Scold as much as you like. You'll never see your silly old book again," cried Amy, getting excited in her turn. "Why not?" "I burnt it up." "What? My little book? I was so fond of and worked over and meant to finish before Father got home." "Have you really burnt it?" said Joe, turning very pale, and while her eyes kindled, her hands clutched Amy nervously. "Yes, I did. I told you I'd make you pay for being so cross yesterday. And I have so." Amy got no further, for Joe's hot temper mastered her and shook Amy till her teeth chattered in her head, crying in a passion of grief and anger, "You wicked, wicked, wicked girl! I never can write it again. I'll never forgive you as long as I live." Meg flew in to rescue Amy and Beth to pacify Joe, but Joe was quite beside herself. With a parting box on the sister's ear, she rushed out of the room, up to the old sofa in the garret, and finished her fight alone. The storm cleared up below, for Mrs. March came home, and having heard the story, soon brought Amy to her senses of wrong she had done her sister. Joe's book was the pride of her heart, and was regarded by her family as a literary sprout of great promise. It was only half a dozen little fairy tales, but Joe had worked over them patiently, putting her whole heart into her work, hoping to make something good enough to print. She had just copied them with great care, and had destroyed the old manuscript, so that Amy's bonfire had consumed the loving work of several years. It seemed a small loss to others, but to Joe it was a dreadful calamity, and she felt that it never could be made up to her. Beth mourned for as a departed kitten, and Meg refused to defend her pet. Mrs. March looked grave and grieved, and Amy felt that no one would love her till she had asked pardon for the act which she now regretted more than any of them. When the tea bell rang, Joe appeared looking so grim and unapproachable, and it took all Amy's courage to say meekly, "Please forgive me, Joe. I'm very, very sorry." "I never shall forgive you," was Joe's stern answer, and from that moment she ignored Amy entirely. No one spoke of the great trouble, and not even Mrs. March, for all had learnt by experience that when Joe was in the mood, words were wasted, and the wisest course was to wait until some little accident or her own generous nature softened. Joe's resentment had healed the breach. It was no happy evening, for though they sewed as usual while their mother read aloud from Bramer, Scott or Edgeworth, something was wanting, and the sweet home peace was disturbed. They felt this moment when singing time came, for Beth could only play. Joe stood dumb as a stone, and Amy broke down, so Meg and Mother sang alone. But in spite of the efforts to be cheery as larks, and the flute-like voices did not seem to chord as well as usual, and all felt out of time. As Joe received the good-night kiss, Mrs. March whispered gently, "My dears, don't let the sun go down upon your anger. Forgive each other and help each other, and begin again tomorrow." Joe wanted to lay her head down on that motherly bosom and cry her grief and anger all away, but tears were unmanly weakness, and she felt so deeply injured that she really couldn't quite forgive yet. So she winked hard, shook her head, and said gruffly, because Amy was listening, "It was an abominable thing, and I don't deserve to be forgiven." With that she marched off to bed, and there was no merry or confidential gossip that night. Amy was much offended that her overtures of peace had been repulsed, and began to wish she had not humbled herself to feel more injured than ever, and to plumb herself onto superior virtue in that way, which was particularly exasperating. Joe still looked like a thundercloud, and nothing went well all day. It was a bitter cold in the morning and she dropped her precious turnover in the gutter. Aunt March had an attack of the fidgets. Meg was pensive. Beth would look grieved and wistful when she got home, and Emmy kept making remarks about people who were always talking about being good and yet who wouldn't try when other people set them a virtuous example.